Hey guys, I'm back. Again. So Metal Gear Solid 1 was a huge success, which gave Hideo Kojima a mandate for a sequel. Also converging on this event was Sony's release of the PlayStation 2, easily the most popular console of its generation. So when Metal Gear Solid 2 was announced in the year 2000 and touted as a game that could really demonstrate the power of the 6th generation, people were incredibly hyped, almost beyond comparison to any other game at the time. So much so that they even bought Zone of the Enders, another Kojima game, just to get at this game's demo. So, was the hype warranted? Well, as usual, let's find out, because this is my review of Metal Gear Solid 2. So 2 years after the Shadow Moses incident, we catch up with Snake and Otacon, both now intent on exposing the Metal Gear program to the public. So Snake infiltrates a tanker transporting a new Metal Gear prototype in order to acquire and publicize evidence of the program's existence. However, the plan takes an unexpected turn for the worse when Ocelot shows up, steals the new Metal Gear for himself, and blows up the tanker, leaving Snake possibly dead? Yeah. 2 years later, an agent named Snake infiltrates the Big Shell, which has been hijacked by a group of terrorists with the president himself being held hostage. So it's up to Snake to save the day, but...
The terrorists call themselves Sons of Liberty.
Sons of Liberty?
The name of their leader is Solid Snake.
The hero of Shadow Moses? So that's why you changed my code name.
Right, but he can't be the Solid Snake. He died 2 years ago on that tanker.
Yeah, meet Raiden. Remember when I was talking about how hyped this game was? Well, throughout all the hype, Raiden was not mentioned in any of the promotional materials. In other words, Kojima snuck in Raiden, deliberately fooling and surprising his fans. As a result, Raiden, and this game to an extent, became quite unpopular with a lot of people. It's funny though, because I actually like Raiden. He's got an interesting backstory and I found him to be likable enough. But then again, particularly in contrast to the badass Solid Snake, he can also come across as lame and a real whiner.
You can take your simulation and we're out here, we bleed, we die.
Calm down.
And then there's his girlfriend.
Jack, do you remember the day we met?
I'm kind of busy right now, Rose.
You're right, sorry.
I do remember. It was right after I transferred to New York. There are all these tourists around you in front of the Federal Hall.
A group of middle-aged Japanese ladies came up and asked me which building it was that King Kong was climbing in the movie. I said it was probably the Chrysler Building. And then you showed up and started mouthing off. You were like, no, it's the Empire State.
So if you hate Raiden, I get it, and you'll find no shortage of company. But here's the cool thing about Raiden. Raiden is meant to directly represent the player. He spends the whole game in awe of the legendary Solid Snake and wants to be him, but in the end he simply can't. Kind of like how players of this game desperately want to play as Snake but can't. So in other words, playing as Raiden elevates Snake to an even higher, more legendary pedestal, which is pretty cool when you think about it. Now with that out of the way, how's the rest of the story? Well, I'll admit that it's less iconic than the first game, which was just a classic lone hero versus all the bad guys tale, in which the hero was badass and the bad guys were compelling threats. Here, as previously established, our primary protagonist is less enthralling, and so are the villains. Granted, it's hard to beat the Foxhound unit from the first game, but really it feels like they didn't even try. The exception is Olga. She's likable and has a satisfying enough arc. And it's also cool to have Ocelot back, but the main group, Dead Cell, really falls flat. Yes, Fat Man is so over the top it's hard not to have fun with him, but he only shows up for literally one boss fight and then he's dead. The leader, Solidus, has respectable motivations, but is otherwise underutilized and a bore. And the other two henchmen are just insufferable. First there's Vamp, who only has 2 traits. He cannot die, and he is vicious. That's it, and it isn't very interesting. And then there's Fortune, a woman who also cannot die and for some reason is miserable about this. Her voice acting is beyond melodramatic and her character is completely one note.
No, that death was meant for me. Why am I the only one that can't die?
Oh my god, shut up! And between her inability to die and Vamp's invincibility, gone is the feeling of fighting one's way through an entire gallery of rogues in order to get to the main villain, removing a nice sense of accomplishment and escalation. It's more muddled. It doesn't help matters that the cutscenes are way longer. I mean, last time, a 15-minute cutscene was the high point in length. Now, that's practically the norm, and the maximum duration is over 40 minutes. And the cutscenes are much more frequent this time around. And a lot of this stuff...
There's a terminal in front of the elevator, a node.
Did you say nerd?
Not nerd, node.
Oh.
clearly could have been edited down. And yet, the cutscenes never lost my attention. Despite everything I've said, I still love this story. Why exactly? Villains aside, the characters are quite compelling. Raiden's a great character, and his relationship with Rose, as much as I hate to admit it, is an interesting one. Snake and Otacon return, and are as good as before. I also like other supporting characters like Stillman and Emma. On the whole, Metal Gear Solid 1 had better characters for sure, but this cast works quite nicely too. The pacing, cutscenes aside, remains really well done too. Once again, the player is always accomplishing a goal, or learning something new, or fighting, if not defeating, a boss. In other words, while the cutscenes make the story drag a bit in execution, it's never slow in concept, and it doesn't feel like it's wasting your time. I also have to respect just how nuts this game was willing to get. This plot is convoluted and far-fetched even by Metal Gear standards. Towards the end, things just go to pure insanity, and it's hard not to simply enjoy the bizarreness unfolding. But there's more than just spectacle to the madness too, and this is what I admire most. Metal Gear Solid 2 puts forth this incredibly fascinating analysis of the digital age, and what it means to take in and pass on information in a world full of information sources. It talks about how the tremendous influx of information the internet created has led to much more group polarization and distortions of reality. It calls into question the validity of everything we know and questions why we know it.
Do you know how many genes exist in an individual?
About 30 to 40,000?
Right, that's what was announced at the turn of the century, but there's actually 100,000 according to the original theory advanced by the scientific community. Information regarding the remaining 60,000 was suppressed by the Patriots.
No.
Why? How would you know? Do you know what a gene looks like? Did you count them yourself?
There are research organizations.
Of course, and their reports have already been subtly altered. They're even beginning to believe the doctored reports.
It's brilliant, and this was in 2001, well before the internet was even as important to society as it is today. And yet this title's claims still ring true. It's phenomenal, and the absolute high point in the series when it comes to higher ideas and themes. So overall, while there is less immediacy to what makes Metal Gear Solid 2's story so compelling when compared to its classic predecessor, this story has a hell of a lot more to offer in general. It's driven less by its explicit plot and more by its implicit themes and ideas. And if you ask me, it's a much more satisfying tale. Moving on to the gameplay. The biggest advancements this game puts forth are an upgraded moveset for Snake and the increased capabilities of his enemies. Let's start with Snake himself. My personal favorite is the somersault. This does wonders in terms of Snake's mobility, particularly in boss fights and especially upstairs. Another very useful addition is the ability to hang from ledges. I'll concede it's a bit on the situational side, but when you do need it, you are very glad you have it. Last, but certainly not least, is the new first-person aiming system. Thank Christ, I no longer have to worry about that stupid auto-aim, and boss fights can get a lot more interesting. Overall, Snake and Raiden feel much better and more versatile this go-around. Yeah, they're still not perfect. I specifically wish there was sort of a crouch walk as an intermediary between the standing and crawling positions. Also, remember the choking woes I expounded on in the last game? But once again, if you take the time to get acclimated, you'll find an unintuitive but flexible control scheme that'll suit your needs very well. The enemy AI is also improved. Yes, they're still nearsighted, mostly deaf, and yeah, but they're also much more dynamic this time thanks to a number of improvements, including a suspicion stage that occurs if you get too close to their line of sight, the fact that you can hold them up at gunpoint and manipulate them, and, my personal favorite, the fact that they now have to call in alerts rather than just instantaneously initiating one upon seeing you. This gives you the opportunity to shoot them or the walkie-talkie and stop the alert. But be careful because there's also a regular check-in system to be mindful of, so if a guard doesn't check in, more troops will be sent in for you to deal with. This, combined with the fact that bodies no longer just disappear upon death, encourages less enemy contact, which, in turn, encourages stealthier play, which is awesome. In a nutshell, the core gameplay is a commendable improvement over the first game. It remains simplistic in that the AI is still deaf, dumb, and short-sighted, so it maintains the fast pace of the first game's stealth. But now there's also more versatility in both your capabilities and the capabilities of your enemies, leading to a more dynamic system in which the player has quite a bit more agency to deal with well-equipped adversaries, which is how it should be. But it's also not perfect. Because of the first-person mode and the addition of a non-lethal tranquilizer, headshots are too easy to pull off, and this makes taking out enemy soldiers way too simple. At times, all you have to do is stroll into a room, and whenever you see an enemy, just take them out with an easy headshot. Before you know it, you've got an empty room to explore. Yes, I know, earlier I said that the persisting bodies and the omnipresent intercom can keep the player from doing this, and these do help the problem, but they are definitely imperfect solutions. Oftentimes, there's much more risk in just leaving a guard conscious than there is in a patrol being sent in, or another guard finding a body, especially since those threats can also be eliminated by that stupid trank. Sure, you can always just not use it, but come on, did we really need the tranquilizer? Whatever, I'll touch on this again when I review Metal Gear Solid 3, but for now, it's an issue, but not a game breaker. It helps that the tranquilizer isn't immediately introduced into the plant chapter, and yeah, you don't have to use it, and not using it really does elevate the experience, but it can just be really tempting and effective. Another issue I have with the game is the radar system. Yep, it's back, and while that in itself is alright, whenever you enter a new room, the game forces you to find a terminal to download the map data before you can use the radar. So in other words, you don't get radar when you enter a room for the first time, and with the zoomed in camera and all, that's basically playing blind, and it sucks. But putting those irritants aside, Metal Gear Solid 2 has a lot of useful and entertaining improvements to offer. But you know what? Putting those irritants aside even, Metal Gear Solid 2 still features a much stronger and better designed campaign that retains and amplifies what made the original special, whilst ameliorating a lot of what weighed it down. Most notably, forced confrontations are drastically reduced. In the first game, it felt like every other room had you unavoidably partake in the trite combat, contradicting everything that this pioneer of the stealth genre had going for it. Metal Gear Solid 2 has far fewer of these moments, meaning that the player gets his fill of the stealth gameplay. That's not to say the gameplay doesn't still stray from stealth somewhat frequently, but this time it rarely contradicts the gameplay's core stealthy vibe. Examples include a really neat sniping puzzle section and an underwater level that, oh my god, I actually enjoy. The only diversion I particularly dislike is this finicky platforming section because of its poor checkpoint placement. Ugh. Otherwise, it's a tightly designed campaign that manages to give variety that's fun in execution rather than just in concept. The level design is a substantial improvement as well. The first game's levels often tended to just be big open rooms. As a result, the surplus of space combined with the short vision range of the guards made remaining undetected easier than it should have been. It usually boiled down to just running around all the vision cones. The narrower hallways and multiple stories that largely compose the levels in this game are a respectable fix to that issue. On the other hand, the issue of backtracking is still very much present. The plant chapter takes place on a somewhat small collection of rooms, and while I appreciate that the path is a circle and not a straight line like the first game, there's still more repetition than there should be. But it's definitely less of an issue than the first game. Gone are the days of traversing Metal Gear's hangar 7 times, thank God. Oh, and this game maintains the first title's practice of rewarding exploration by placing important items such as thermal goggles and body armor off the beaten track, so that's good.
Then, of course, there's the boss fights. I like them a lot better too.
I can't think of a single poorly designed encounter. I particularly love the action-packed Fat Man fight with its ingenious ending, and the Metal Gear Ray fight might just be the most adrenaline-pumping boss fight of the whole series. Even the blander shooting gallery fights like Olga and Vamp are still decently creative and entertaining. Plus the boss fight music is just great. Actually, before I forget to mention it, like I did in my review of the first game, this game has a fantastic soundtrack. Famed film score composer Harry Gregson Williams just knocked it out of the park with music that is both fitting and memorable. Particular favorites of mine include the aforementioned boss theme, the credits song, and the completely revamped Metal Gear Solid theme. I mean, holy crap. And then there's the skateboarding remix. So in summary, Metal Gear Solid 2 is a top-notch sequel. Seriously, it almost perfectly does what all sequels should do. It builds on what came before whilst rectifying earlier mistakes. The story builds on the first game's strengths of fielding heavy themes and ends up with a far more thought-provoking and, at least for me, way more satisfying narrative. The gameplay seriously amplifies the stealthy aspirations of its predecessor whilst improving or minimizing many issues. Innovations in enemy AI and new additions to the player's arsenal of moves make the game feel more versatile. And while I'll admit that the villains are less compelling and maybe the story itself does lack that classic feel that the first game nailed, the pacing of the game is still very much on point, and I'd say that the thought-provoking messages that this game carries deep within its lunacy absolutely make for a worthwhile trade-off. I love this game. It exhibits more than enough confidence and polish to put forth an unforgettable experience. Gee, do you guys remember the good old days when it only took me 2 weeks to post each review? Look guys, I'm sorry, but for whatever it's worth, I'm really trying to make these videos as good as I possibly can, and that's a large reason for the delay. Anyway, good news, next video is precisely what I believe you've all been waiting for, and I hope to get it up before the end of the summer. Take care.
Raiden, your grip went up again.
Jack, you're truly amazing.